This is Fujifilm XF10.
Why does it sound like feel like a stranger? It's like I'm surprised by the good things in life. Funny how you clear out all the noise in my head.
So Fujifilm, a camera brand that pretty much ignored the laws of economics in the last 5 or 10 years, with their cameras becoming more expensive every year. I don't know any other consumer goods brand that would experience this. Just imagine if your old iPhone would become suddenly more expensive than it was 1 year ago. And this camera is actually no exception, and despite being more than 5 years old now, it still costs more than $700 in good condition on the second-hand market, which actually reflects a 40% increase from the price on launch. I am personally a huge fan of smaller and pocketable cameras, and especially digicams. So when I got to know that this thing exists, it made me really excited. It's a pretty small camera, it's much smaller than most of the modern Fujifilms. It's even smaller than X100 series, and this is how it looks like compared to my iPhone. But it still packs a pretty decent 24 megapixels APS-C size sensor, which is basically the same sensor size as most of the modern Fujifilm cameras, even the bigger ones. The only difference is that this one has a Bayer filter sensor, which is different from the Fujifilm's famous X-trans sensor. Without getting into details, this basically means that it has slightly different colors that are maybe a bit less distinct compared to modern Fujifilm cameras, but they turned out to be actually pretty good. It has a fixed 18.5mm lens, which translates to approximately 28mm in full frame equivalent, and it's a pretty wide focal length, at least for me, because I'm usually shooting on something closer to 40 or 50mm, but I actually grew to like this one for everyday shooting. My first experience with this camera was pretty positive and I liked the colors that it produced, but what made me fall in love with it was actually taking it alone on my trip to Seoul, and it turned out to be an amazing travel camera. The first thing that you just cannot stop appreciating is how small this camera is for such a great combination of a proper APS-C sensor and a built-in lens. You can easily fit it into a pocket or a small bag with other things in it, and people around you don't tend to pay attention when you hold it in your hand. It is very easy to use with just one hand, by the way, so you can quickly adjust aperture or exposure compensation with 2 customizable dials on top and another one to change shooting modes. And that just means that you naturally want to bring this camera with you everywhere and take a lot of pictures in scenarios that you would probably not expect. And I even took it to a baseball game with me. Okay, this experience was actually so fun that I did go to see another game a couple days later. But getting back to the XF10, being a Fujifilm, it does offer a comprehensive quick menu option where you can customize the JPEG output, by tuning saturation, highlights and shadows intensity, noise reduction and sharpness. It is not as comprehensive as more advanced Fuji cameras, so for example, you cannot tune the intensity of the grain. But the most important thing is, you do have access to most of the film simulations, which in the end has the biggest impact on colors. And this pleasing Fuji colors is definitely a big selling point here. If you want to have more room in terms of color output, you can set a film simulation bracketing, so the camera will produce 3 different jpegs to choose from. And of course you can fine-tune the white balance to further shift the colors to your liking. Finally, I must mention just how good this camera is built, despite generally being on the more plasticky side. Like, these dials on top have very satisfying clickiness to them that Fujifilm seems to have mastered over the years. It is not all positive though, and the first thing that you notice is the performance of the autofocus. I did not find it to be as bad as some other reviewers say it is, but it's definitely something that you need to get used to. It does haunt quite a bit, especially in low light. And then when you switch to manual focus, the control ring on the lens is just not informative. There are some ways to minimize this issue, like using the snapshot mode that this camera has, which gives you an option to choose a distance where the camera just always stays in focus. Which is not bad for street shooting, but it's just not the way I like to take pictures, I think. Might be useful to some people though. Another thing is using the touch controls on the screen. Like, there are some of the functionalities that you access by swiping the screen down, left, right or up. And even after 2 months of using this camera, I still didn't fully get a grip on this one. Another thing is when you use electronic shutter, this camera has a lot of rolling shutter issues, and it happened to me quite a lot in the beginning when you take a picture of a building and the building is just warping all over. I even thought that something is wrong with my particular camera, but then yeah, it just turned out to be a common issue. So now I only use mechanical shutter on this one. So it's definitely not a perfect camera, but I'm not sure if we should really expect something more from a camera of this size. It might be a bit of a silly comparison, but to me using this camera is somewhat similar to how some of the musicians like to use all the guitars, so all the instruments, and overcome some of the negative aspects of them, but this makes the sound a bit more unique, and to me using this camera is somewhat similar in this sense. You have probably heard the expression that the best camera is the camera that you have with you, and I personally found that XF10 is the camera that I want to carry with me all the time. And I do have a few other amazing compact cameras in my collection, so it's saying something. It has a very decent high quality sensor, so the quality of the pictures are almost always pretty good. The 28mm lens is also pretty versatile for everyday situations. Maybe most importantly though, the pictures that you take with it have very strong sense of atmosphere and a sense of mood, vibes. So when I look at my travel photographs, they just immediately give me this warm sense of nostalgia. And to me, it's probably the best compliment that you can give to an everyday carry camera. If you watched until the end, I wanna thank you. And if you enjoyed the vibe so far, please give this video a like and see you next time.